So welcome back everyone. Thanks you for joining us as we're out on location again to record the second phase of my adventure with God. We're going to visit various spots that are really quite significant on my journey, including an odd sacred space where God really spoke to me. So come along for the ride. Well, of course, no Scottish story would be authentic if it didn't include a shot of the rain. So here we are today, and allow me in passing, folks, to speak about the call of God, something that's not so popular or spoken about these days. But I'm absolutely thrilled that God is still putting his hand on young people in their prime today to serve him, and young people are responding positively, and that gives me great joy. For me, it was the first 6 months of 1989. You know that song, that beautiful song that says, "When I feel the touch of your hand upon my life." And for these 6 months, I just felt God's hand on my shoulder. It's hard to describe. It was stressful, but very, very precious. And I went to a conference one Saturday, and one of the speakers talked about this Christian doctor and his clinic in Harley Street in London. And he had an appointment with a missionary home from Africa with his sick wife. And he listened carefully, and then he took the missionary aside and said, "Hey, what kind of husband are you, boy? You should have had this lady home for treatment months ago." And he absolutely ripped into this poor missionary. And almost as a throwaway comment, he said, "Where was it that you served God anyway in Africa?" And the missionary mentioned it. And the doctor had to excuse himself, and he completely broke down in his office because God had called that doctor to the very same place in Africa 10 years before. And the opulence of his Harley Street practice and the prestige of his job prevented the doctor choosing God's best for his life. He still had an outstanding practice, don't get me wrong, but the will of God had come secondary. So that really, really bored a hole on me. And I went straight up to my office in Queensley, second floor, looked out from my office window on £3 million worth of inventory. And I said, "Lord, please, please, don't allow material things to get in the way of me being obedient to your call." So that whole weekend, I'm wrestling, and on Monday morning I went to the office and I couldn't focus on anything. So I finally got up, locked my office, said to my secretary, "Agnes, I'm out of here, cancel all my appointments." And she says, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I don't know." "When will you be back?" "I don't know." And I didn't. And I get into the car, and here is where, this very park is where I ended up, Tallcross Park on the east end of Glasgow. So as I walked through the trees in Tallcross Park, I realised that this was going to be a very significant moment. I just could sense it. And God brought to my mind Gethsemane, and Jesus wrestling in the olive groves of that garden with God's plan and what it was going to cost him. And I came down to this very spot, and I remember getting down on my knees and saying, "Lord, Romans 12 says that your will is perfect. So I'm going to go for that. I'm going to lay aside what I want and my will, and I'm going to choose your will because I believe that is what is best for my life." and when I got up off my knees right here, I knew the battle was over and I had surrendered to whatever God had for me. So we've just left Tollcross Park on the east side of Glasgow, heading now for Queensley. Our business had originated in Shettleston, and as it grew and needed more space, we moved to Baillieston and then eventually to Queensley, where we bought 17 acres of our own land and built our own buildings. So that's where we're headed now, to see if these buildings still stand. So here we are on the eastern side of Queensley Industrial Estate, and after my wrestling was over and I knew that my professional life and business was over, then I came back to here, which was USAFE Cash and Carry Limited at that time, and put in my resignation. With the full blessing of my father-in-law, amazingly, he said, "We saw this coming, John. We knew God had a full-time ministry for you. So he'll look after the business." And I resigned, and I had been initially company secretary and then for 10 years financial director of this substantial company. And I resigned and left on the 30th of June 1989. So the elders back at Bothwell said, "Hey, your time ain't done here in Bothwell, I hope you realise." And I said, "No, I'm happy with that." So having served as a volunteer leader for 14 years, we then continued for another 7 years in Bothwell, throwing ourselves into the ministry there, which on a full-time capacity now. And I was the pastor for 7 years up until 1996. And that gave us a total of 21 years in Bothwell. And at that time, I sensed that there was a move coming. 21 years in one place is a long time, and I sensed a new chapter was coming. The 21-year chapter in Bothwell was over, and I had been working with the Riverside Gospel Church here in Kirkintilloch for a number of summers, helping them with summer outreaches. And the elders said to me, "John, why do we not just make this arrangement permanent?" And so after 21 years of marriage, we uprooted the family and moved right just to the edge of Kirkintilloch. They had a range of excellent ministries. We've just passed the care home on my right, your left, and we did a regular ministry in there. And here across the street we have Oxgang Primary School, and our friend Alison Hill from Glow had a wonderfully consistent ministry to children in that school for many, many years, up until just quite recently, I believe. And the elders here had quite a vision for the future, in that they had established this excellent set of facilities which were really, really good. And my friend David Curry had a marvellous ministry to teenagers. Over 100 teenagers came here every Friday night, and it was quite wonderful. And I guess in our time here, 20 or so people came to put their faith in Jesus, including my friend Andy Martin, who for about 20 years now, subsequent to his conversion, was the Scottish representative for Missionary Aviation Fellowship, and I think he holds that position to this day. I'm so happy that this church that I had an involvement in for a few years, now renamed Home Church. It's prospering under the leadership of Dave Brackenridge. Now back in 1998, after 2 years here, I had this increasing sense that my tenure wasn't going to be long term, and I have to confess the wrestling started all over again. Was God up to something new? Was it going to be big? And the answer to that is yes, because in God's plan we were going to take a step big enough to take us across the big pond, the Atlantic Ocean, to the US of A. So the big move from Bothwell brought us here to number 14 William Ure Place, and down to my left is the Forth and Clyde Canal, where I did some serious wrestling with God yet again. In my life, folks, I've discovered that God challenges you with steps of faith. Initially, these steps are pretty small, and you go and have the courage to take that step, and of course God comes through for you because He's utterly trustworthy. And how your faith is strengthened is that each time He just gives you bigger and bigger and bigger steps of faith. And that's what He was doing with us as a family. And the massive step of faith, as I've already indicated, was to uproot from our own country and culture and head over to Manitowoc, Wisconsin. An established church there of a very sound, theologically orthodox church wanted to plant another church in the next town called Two Rivers. And right in our house here that I indicated, we had a 2-hour-long conference call one Saturday afternoon, which went very well. May was involved in that too. And then after that, a 4-week visit by me right out there to Wisconsin, where I preached every Sunday and had many meetings in home group settings. They were fun actually, because we had Q&A sessions, and the Americans are full of questions, so it was really great. And at the end of that, I'm told they had a unanimous vote to call this Scotsman. And of course, the joke at that time was that they loved the accent. My theology didn't matter a hill of beans. It was the accent they wanted. But unanimously they called us. And would you believe that we tried to sell our house in November? The estate agent said, forget it, mate. Nobody buys a house in November. And ours sold in 10 days. It was really quite remarkable. And before we could blink, this adventure was becoming a reality. And we booked our flights for the middle of January 1999. And off we went. You know, I often say the adventure was so intense that my heart couldn't stand it, and in actual fact it didn't, because the very first year there I had to have a procedure called an atherectomy to remove a major blockage in my aorta. But that apart, we soon recovered from that and got on. I'll never forget entering the immigration department in Chicago. These guys are really mean and wield a lot of power. And it was the only time in my life I felt like a refugee. I'd left the shores of my homeland and I still hadn't entered this new country, and we really, really felt vulnerable. But eventually the senior officer called us into his office and he said, well, John and May, flipping through your papers seem to be all in order. So welcome to America, Pastor. I hope you have a wonderfully successful ministry. So that was hugely reassuring. And we made our way up to Wisconsin, where it was 5 feet of snow in the dead of winter. I thought I'd got the wrong flight and arrived in the Arctic Circle, but we just had to learn to hibernate like all the others during the worst months of winter. But that started a wonderful season of ministry where for 12, 13 years we saw gradual progress and people come to faith, so that after that period 1,500 people would have said that Hope Community Church was their home church. And of these, on average, half, 750, 800, would be in church worshipping every Sunday morning. The final point for now, folks, is just to indicate this was not a bed of roses. There is enormous pain in being obedient to the Lord. It was that way for Jesus. Tremendous joy, sure, unspeakable joy, but real pain involved as well. We had to leave May's mum, just widowed, less than a year before. We left my parents, we left our siblings, May's sister Ruth and my sister Janet. We left our kids, one in high school, one at university. Literally as we flew across the Atlantic, Graham, our youngest son, was sitting his higher prelims. And we've always had to live with this pain of separation. And then you get the naysayers, the negative Pharisee type people who said, he's just away to America for the big bucks. These jibes hurt, because the truth is that we came back poorer from America than we went. But we just were so sure that God was in this and he was going to honour any little bit of trust and faith we had. And I was humbled to be called to be one of a team of pastors leading a church plant in rural Wisconsin, as I say, which grew to a membership of something like 1,500 each Sunday. And I can't wait to tell you what happened from there on.